Melissa, welcome back to the show. And you brought some friends. Please introduce them.
Hey Ryan, yeah, thank you so much for having me back on. It's such a pleasure to talk with you, and we have a ton of fun together, as we know from our last episode. So I am so honored to bring this panel to you all so you can hear their amazing stories. I am very excited to introduce three authors from our new book that is coming out Women's History Month 2025, Latinas in Public Relations, Shaping Communications, Communities and Culture. And today I have with me Paola Vargas Strassner, Jeanette E. Garcia, and Marisol Vindiola. I chose these three authors to join us today, not only because they represent so many different parts of our PR world, but their backgrounds are diverse. They're from different parts of the US. We've got Arizona, the Maryland, D.C. area represented, and of course, our home base here in San Antonio, Texas. But also, these ladies were probably the most candid and honest in their author stories within our book collective. So I wanted them to share their origin stories with you, how they got into PR, and be honest about that imperfect path. We all walk as humans, but it's really important that aspiring pros understand there's no perfect linear A to Z path into the industry. And when you're in it, you may have to go forward, you may have to go sideways, you may have to go back. But taking care of yourself along the way is the important part we need to focus on.
Excellent introduction. What do you wish you would have known when you first started in this industry as maybe a fresh graduate ready to tackle the world of PR with all that enthusiasm and all that energy? What are the things that you really wanted to know? And we'll start with Paola.
Thanks, Melissa, as well for the opportunity to be here today and sharing Ryan with your students and this wonderful audience. Our journey, mass communications bachelor graduate. So during my program that I did my career, well, my studies in Colombia, we had actually the opportunity to explore the 6 or 7 different fields within communications that you can choose. One of them being public relations that we called also organization. So while the first 3 years of the program, we still have to go through all of them. So it's radio, TV, editorial, all these different components. And then the last years of the career, we can choose and focus on one, which I did audiovisual production. That's my emphasis, more about journalism and audiovisual production. Obviously, I wish I would have known that we do need a lot of networking, and that requires learning how everybody has different personalities and how we need to adapt and adjust to every one of these traits and personalities that sometimes right now, in my public affairs field, I can see, and sometimes that's what makes us professionals to manage each and one of the people's individual characteristics.
Excellent. Thank you, Paola and Marisol.
Thank you, Ryan, for hosting us today. I'm so excited to share about our book. I would say that mine was organic first, is because my first when I go into university, I want to be an engineer and then an accounting. And everybody says, how do you want to be an engineer or an accountant? You're such a person people, right? And I start going, but I wasn't really happy and being accounting. After that, I start business administration. And all my friends, we had an entrepreneur project. And they said, okay, you're going to do the public relations side of the entrepreneurship project. And then I went to the Mexican consulate when I came to the US as an international student. And believe it or not, Ryan, I didn't even know how to say 1, 2, 3. I just get in the US. I didn't know anything. So, and then I studied English and I went to work for the Mexican consulate in Tucson. And the first thing they said, okay, go to the legal department. And I was like, yeah, okay, I can learn there. But after that, they say, no, I think you're better for public relations. So it was very organic. And I would say my first instinct of the answer to your question is get to know your passion. Because sometimes other people see what you're good, you're organic, you're natural, and you don't see it yourself because you want to be like your mom or like your someone in your family. And maybe because public relations, sometimes they don't see it like you put a lot of intellectual, like an engineer career or accounting, but having that emotional connection just to develop that, I think is a great idea. But getting to know what is your passion. And once you know your passion is public relation, go for it because you can use it in every single way. After the Mexican consulate, I went and worked for the tourism industry as marketing director. But I ended up doing more public relations side than the marketing side. And it was really crazy because that opened so many doors. And now I'm doing business development, which is not like in that tech company, but it's not like 100% public relations, but that skills open doors for me. So I was part of the board of director for Public Relations Society of America in Tucson, chapter Arizona, and that opened so many doors. Like, in fact, I'm here in this project because I met Jill, who is also co-author, and she referred to me. So I would say get to know your passion.
Excellent. Thank you, Marisol. Appreciate that. Jeanette?
Agree with a lot of what Paola and Marisol said. My journey actually into PR was very much started when I was actually in high school. I took a career aptitude test. I was always in between being either a journalist or in business. And the career aptitude test taught me about public relations. And that really just had me start figuring out what that all meant. I then went to UT Austin, majored in public relations, and actually at one point did become a journalist for a brief moment. And I think my best advice to everyone is just like really figure out and like Marisol said, know your passion, but also don't be afraid to fail. Failure and making mistakes are all part of your journey. And I know Melissa mentioned our book earlier in this podcast, and that is definitely what my story specifically says. Sometimes you need to fail in order to continue to move forward. I was actually fired from my first job, and it was a small business. The networking part is definitely a big part of it because I actually got that first job because of networking. And a lot of the jobs that I've gotten are because of networking. So network, don't be afraid to fail because at the end of the day, sometimes you have to take a step back in order to move forward.
Excellent. And Melissa, I have a question I want you to answer too. This idea of Latinas in PR, how does a cultural background being leveraged help us do PR better? How does that kind of heritage, that kind of life experience and shared experiences help us to do PR better?
Yeah. I mean, thank you for the question, Ryan. It's really important that I think, particularly students, if they can, grasp this concept early. If you understand how people like to communicate, how they like to live their lives, the cultural values that we have inspire the actions that we take. So if we want to use public relations to change behaviors for the good, we have to be able to relate to people in the ways that they connect to. And so understanding people's cultural preferences, how they choose to live their lives is very important to our work. And what I was finding, and the reason I really focused in on Latinas for this collection is because in my lived experiences, right, the things that I've went through personally in my life, which is very valuable to all of our work, but also my professional and my research experiences, I kept coming up with some kind of obstacle. And we hear about in the workplace like glass ceiling and, there's systems that hold you back and all that can be true. And there can be things culturally that we learn in our family groups, in our friend groups, maybe even at our schools that make us feel like I don't want to stick out in any way that makes me weird. Like I have 2 kids right now and that's weird. I'm like, what's normal? Let's talk about that. Like who gets to decide that? And our unique values can really help us. So for me, what I was finding time and time again was that there was something particular about Latinas. Women in general are not comfortable with self-promotion. Part of that's because we're taught not to be. But to do well in the American workplace, we've got to be able to be good at that. We have to be able to share and take credit for our work without putting people down. But in particular, I would find in the Latino culture, when you intersect, right, being a woman and being from that cultural background, we're often taught to be more like a martyr, right? Very giving, family first, which is, again, can be very positive and helpful. But when you're trying to make your way through a world and maybe in an industry where you are the first generation in your family, to go to university, maybe to work in public relations. I found personally, I was having to explain myself a whole lot and there was a lot of emotional weight of trying to get approval. And then I realized I have to take some of the attributes from the more independent type culture, individualistic type culture that we really promote a lot in the US workplace, and kind of make that my own. Because there are times where, as a leader, I need to stand out and I can't be afraid to do that because what will my, so and so say? So and so says. One thing I'm really passionate about telling students and Latinos in particular is that you may not get the support that you need for your professional career from your family or from your friends now. And so building that network, like the ladies have said, is really, really important because they become the community you need to do well in this aspect of your life. And so in the introduction of the book, I really dig into the research and, some of the why, which is we're not an equal representation in the public relations field. That's kind of the way Latinos are represented in almost every workplace in some ways, right? In some of the more leadership roles that the representation is not equal to the percentage of people they are in our communities. So we want to elevate that and we want to change that in a positive way. But Latinas in particular, because of our cultural background, sometimes Marianismo is something we have to fight against. I worked for years, Ryan, to figure out what is the word I use that I feel like I don't want to be too loud or too much. And people say, oh, you're too self-promotional. And I'm like, I'm just trying to make people aware of how I can help and you should too. And so what is that? Guilt or pressure? And I kept looking for the right word in English. I kept looking for the right word in Spanish. And the term that I came closest to is Marianismo, which is when I ask people about it, they're like, I haven't heard of that, right? But if you look it up, it is kind of this mix. So I felt very passionate about if you can find the root cause or you can go upstream and find out what is the problem in this situation. For us, I found that Latinas in particular were keeping their hands down a lot, not realizing that they may not be invited to the leadership table. They may not be asked to come to this event. You may not have a friend at that mixer or that luncheon, and you still need to push yourself and do it and go and ask and raise your hand. So this is a very encouraging call to action by these authors here and those in the book. We're being very vulnerable and saying, hey, look, these are our imperfect stories. Here's where we really put ourselves out there. We're doing it now. It feels scary, but you should do it anyway. And so that's all the heart that comes behind this.
And a question for the panel. Do you have any stories that illustrate this unique connection between heritage and what you do?
In my journey, as I recently graduated and I moved to the States, I was truncated first, because I didn't have the experience yet to jump into a network, and my dream was to work as a journalist, in one of the networks. So it took a while to realize as an immigrant, you don't always get your first foot on the door. And I think for the students, I really want you to, yes, discover your passion. And once you find your passion, just keep motivated, keep, in mind. For me, it took many years in the making. And it took, again, adapting to sometimes take those side jobs because while we're building our career, we still need to, be accountable for the day-to-day financial responsibilities that we have. And that doesn't always happen. You don't always get your dream job in journalism or PR, and you still need to, again, be financial, reliable, responsible. I speak with a lot of immigrants, not just women, but, young men too that have migrated. And I just tell them that I got to what I got, knowing that non-linear path that Melissa has mentioned that requires taking side jobs. For me, that was, retail. Retail, I actually gained a lot of experience that then were transferable skills in management. I worked with one company and I've lived in Florida, DC, California, and now in Maryland, which makes it harder to get your experience and your steady job. But I was blessed, fortunate to being, I guess, considered valuable or an asset for this same fashion retail job that would hire me in every other state, while I kept in mind, okay, how am I going to continue to build upon the skills? So I took a lot of volunteer jobs while I was in DC, and I needed to meet new people, reestablish a network. It was not the same I had built in Florida. In Florida, when I got here through the years, I was able to secure a position in the first bilingual newspaper, where I learned that language is key. We all spend 5 years in our professional careers learning, and I speak for myself, Spanish. That's the language for me in Colombia. I needed to become an master to get my communication. You need to be savvy and you need to do your work. So I actually found my path to public relations as a journalist for the newspaper. I was a writer, but I was hired as a marketing assistant. So know that your foot in the door, take the opportunity. It might not be the first position that you want, but don't discard it because other opportunities can open after that. So I took this marketing director position at the newspaper because it was bilingual. It gave me the opportunity to translate some of the content that we received, and little by little, I started picking up on English. And then I got the pleasure to introduce the first public information officer for the city of Florida, which was a woman. So for me, that was very inspiring. First, it was my first introduction to public affairs. In her role, she was a Navy veteran, retired. She was also, born in Puerto Rico, and she was amazing. And it made me think about a new career path. I'm like, for journalists, you write to the public, but in public relations, you write as a representative. So you write for the media, and that's a whole different take. For me, it was an amazing opportunity to be at the newspaper because a lot of the work I do now, it's very similar. It's just changing the way I write the audio. I was assisting my boss, who was very involved in the community, also with the Hispanic Business Council and the Kissimmee Chamber of Commerce. He was the director for the Hispanic portion of the event. And so he brought me on board as his PR assistant for Black Tie event. And then he was big at networking. So little by little, you start building not only your network, but you start building on the skills that are transferable. Later, when I moved to San Diego, it was the same story. I had to start building up upon my new community. Their work different than people in the East Coast. They work different than people on the South. People on the South are a little more relaxed, start your days later. You still get your job when, I moved to the North. People just go, bam, 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 bam. And once you go to the West Coast, I had to learn you can't go that fast here. I mean, things get done and they're very productive because, college classes too. You have to learn how to work with people. It was funny because one of my teachers told me, they were all professors, right, for broadcast media in Florida. And one of my, you will do better in the Hispanic. And when I speak to other people, they're like, and he wasn't really, he was probably coming from a good place, but he wasn't really helping well. Because I went through this term again as I became accredited in public relations. It is a thought that if you're Hispanic, you only serve those clients. So for people in agencies, usually they just send them to the Hispanics because you speak the language. And as I mastered public relations, and later in my career progression, I thought, I don't want to do that. I'm in the United States. English is the first language. And that was another reason why I relocated from Florida to DC. So have those ambitions.
I have been fortunate. I'm from San Antonio, native San Antonian. Definitely culturally going up to Austin was definitely a different shock. We're so close to Austin, yet it's two different worlds. But I came back because I knew I wanted to make my career and my impact here in San Antonio as a native San Antonian. I now work for a nonprofit called Up Partnership that does focus on our strategic plan is a plan called Future Ready Bear County. No, its North Star is to increase enrollment into post-secondary and credential programs to 70% by 2030. And of course, UTSA is one of our great post-secondary partners, of course. But I'm lucky to have been here in San Antonio and have had very authentic Latina and Latino mentors that have been in public relations. I can definitely think of one of the other authors within this book, Dr. Lorena Pulido, who I absolutely love and consider a mentor of mine. And she actually works for San Antonio ISD now. But one lesson for sure that I've learned from her specifically is to always be authentic and to be yourself. Whether that's being loud or wearing colorful. I'm actually very muted today. Usually I am big on colors, but definitely being authentic and being yourself. I have also had the privilege of working for the city's economic development department, as well as the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And I think through that, I have been able to, of course, live as much and as authentic as I can be as a Latina. So, like I said, it's been a blessing to actually live in San Antonio where it is majority Latino. And I haven't had to experience as much, but still, I mean, there are still obstacles where even in economic development, for example, it was very much our director was a Latino at the time, but a lot of the people who were coming in were very much culturally different. So at times it was either myself or one other person who were the only Latinas at the table. But definitely know that you are allowed to take the space that you are. You're invited to the table for a reason. And I know at times I have imposter syndrome, but I always go back to thinking, remember, you're at the table for a reason, and your expertise is valuable.
I came from Mexico when I was like 21, international student. But in that culture in my family, like where they say, be quiet so you can be prettier. And it's something like, it always was in my mind, even my personality is more extrovert. So I always was behind the scenes and every single job that I have, but I was like organizing media, the media relations, everything about public relations. I was doing the job at the consulate, and then I was like kind of always behind the scene promoting public media relations, event organizing. Then when I went to work for Visit Tucson, I started as administrative assistant, and one of the reasons is because like my English is always was like sabotaging me. It was like playing with my mind and say, maybe not yet. I need to get better. I need to get rid of my accent, which I have never done. And I love it now, but I really embrace it. And I say, this is the way I talk, and I will embrace it instead of fighting it all the time. So I went as a administrative assistant, and I move on in positions all the way to senior director of marketing. And one of my biggest passion is like that intersection in cross cultural, and maybe like you say, Janet, is because I was living in the border in La Frontera, and so I'm so proud of being citizenship of the Sonoran Desert. Like I have to let people know what we have here, the majestic of this desert. So even when I was like every time like they post I was there, and I know I was really good candidate for the position, exposition. I always said, I'm here, I want it. And I'm here. And at one point, one of my boss say, hey, Marisol, you need to work on your accent. And I was like, you know what? Accent doesn't make me not doing a really good job. And I'm really good at what I'm doing. And I don't think that interfere in any way with my performance. So every time it was a position, I want it and I want it. And one of the reasons I left that organization is because I get to the senior director position, and then I say, what else? By vice president. And if I want that position, and I had to wait another like a few years before I get it. So I say, no, I'm going to look for that opportunity. So I always like very ambitious, and people like maybe they think that I am arrogant, but I really know what I want in life. And I know I want to learn. I know I want to meet people. I know, and I trust in my potentials to keep growing. And I'm so proud of myself. And that's what I tell my friends. It's like coming from this, I'm coming from a really small town from Rio Sonora, from a really poor family, functional family, to where I'm getting right now, sitting right now, literally seeing the best view of Austin in a conference, meeting people from all over the world. For me, it's like American dream, right? So for me, it's like believe in what you want in life and focus on what you want and keep pushing, and also put your hand out and don't be quiet. And because you don't look prettier if you're quiet, and embrace and be like authentic yourself and be passionate. Like I was kind of quiet somehow, always behind the scenes. One day, out of the blue, a lady, they own a radio station in the area of Tucson, and between Sonora and Tucson, they asked me, can you do a radio program? And I was like, me? Like, I'm like, I don't know. So I started doing it, and I was feeling myself like an pez en agua, like in my own skin. I was so And people start looking at, listening, I said, nobody's going to listen to this radio show, right? And then another radio station from the Sonora side, from Mexico side, they asked me if they can broadcast it. So it started growing and growing. And I really enjoyed radio as well. I have my podcast. I'm one of the voices for the State of Department for the Spanish voice. And I'm so excited. So my recommendation would be proud of who you are, focus on what you want to become, and the sky is the limit.
Yeah, and I'll say, Ryan, Marisol, if you read her story, she didn't live an easy life. Like, it wasn't smooth. And I loved your energy around it, your enthusiasm for what you did have and what you could make of it, right? And I think that that is so helpful because if you're going to work in public relations, you'll hear like you need to build a thick skin. Well, what does that mean? You need to be resilient. You need to be able to bounce back. You need to be able to take rejection. Marisol is doing business development now. Like, that's sales. Guess what? So is media relations. So is fundraising. So is getting your first job. Being able to pitch out an idea and back it up and follow it through. These are all skills you'll need. They will serve you in any career, but uniquely, I would say public relations, of all the communication disciplines you could focus on in your career, there's a lot of purpose behind it, but you got to work on your inner strength and you've got to work on your perseverance and resilience.
I'm agree with you, Melissa. That rejection is like, no. It's because my mind works like, there is no way it's a no answer, right? So for me, when someone say no and I say, I don't need to take a no, that rejection is like, because I really want what I want.
I completely agree with Moses' point on the thick skin. But at the same time, in my chapter, I say it's okay to cry because at the end of the day, public relations is super stressful and it can be super stressful. And there's a lot of like, especially nowadays, it's very much cross-comm and marketing field. It's not what public relations was even when I graduated from college and had my first job. And at times you're handling and wearing multiple hats and having to take them on and sometimes have multiple on at the same time. And sometimes it's okay to actually have that pressure get to you. You just have to know, take a breath, take a moment, give yourself maybe 10, 15 minutes to let it all out. But the resilience is going back in, bouncing back in, and actually completing the work and the task that you need to do. And then you just feel so much better after that because then you just feel accomplished. I'd hate to say this, but it really is what keeps me going, just knowing that at the end of the road, that task is done and that success, once it's done successfully, it just gives you so much more joy.
Yes, I second Marisol. That brings me back to my beginnings, in the career. I actually started before the newspaper, and I just remember this. I went to Universal Studios Boulevard, and I saw Azteca America, which is the Mexican network. So they had the affiliate for the local community in Florida. And I had that imposter syndrome that has been mentioned. And I'm like, should I go? Should I don't? But I still had that goal that I had set when I graduated and I moved from Colombia. I need to start and I need to do it. So I got out of my car and I walked the door. So I'm going to kind of like briefly mention all the attributes that, Marisol, Melissa, and Jeanette, because it's all important and they're all applicable for students who are starting their journey. So I got out of the car and I went with my resume. I had already gotten many rejections from the big network and Univision, because they all have this Spanish side. And so those are the first places that you usually see, or I did see. So they're no, they want people with more experience. They want different. How am I going to do it? I just graduated and I'm just recently, moving to the States. As an immigrant, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to this one. So Universal Studios Boulevard is where Azteca America was located. I get out. And the receptionist, again, who also wore multiple hats because it was a small station, TV station, happened to be from Colombia. There is something about Hispanic immigrants that they want to help. You don't usually see the advocating, for all of us to adapt to the States because little by little, we are going to find people that want to help us. That has been this network from now in public relations, PRSA. We all connected because we have the same mindset of continue to grow, do our best, and in the public relations. At that time, I didn't have that net. So reaching out to Hispanics was a major component for me. So let's not forget our backgrounds, right? Embrace that. So being creative, thinking outside the box. Okay, maybe I can teach it different, not just the certain thought. Maybe I can do an infomercial for, like medical offices or like that. And I was blessed, fortunate that happened. And then with the Hispanic community, like there's a lot of festivals. We celebrate a lot of things. We celebrate, we like to celebrate, we like to party. So then I got, okay, the Colombian festival, that was my first approach. And reaching out to people, not being quiet, so what Marisol say, knock on those doors and you'll find your path. So now we had the, funds from the festival. We can broadcast the festival. And it was a win-win for the station. And those were PR skills for me. Like again, at the moment, I didn't know. I could have simply said, oh no, they don't have the audiovisual producer role I was looking for. But being adventurous, take on these opportunities because you don't know they could be open your doors for the next thing. Start also that mindset of uniting, not isolating ourselves because we could be from Mexico or Salvador, but we are here. So we start to bring ourselves to our community and understand productive society, requires our talent. And we could be better if we understand that and we grow. I'm going to share this because there's a lot of younger people. I had to work. And I'm like, what am I going to do? So one of my radio station coworkers say, okay, you can go and like a call center. So I went to the call center and then I went, which is a very common job, for young. And I was a disaster. And I thought I'm not quitting. And I kept having 5 different managers with conversations one-on-ones. Might not be for you. We take this really seriously. We're a different industry. And I kept crying, to talk to my dad who was still in Colombia. And he would laugh. He's like, oh my gosh, you never heard, like most of the Hispanic countries, there's a different way where you're able to afford, like a housekeeper like that. And I was very thankful in that way. So I never really had experienced everything. It was a disaster. So at one point I had a conversation with like the senior man. He spoke to me like talking to a daughter. He's like, this might not be for you. And I reflect on that. Even though I didn't want to give up, I listened to that advice. It's not a step rejection, but this might not be my. I'm glad I did that following weekend. I say, thank you so much for the opportunity. And then I called the newspaper because again, at the beginning, I had already worked with him, but as a delivery of his paper. So I never felt really empowered to say, I have a bachelor's degree. I know how to do this. I know how to do that. And they did have the opportunity for the delivery of newspaper. So this was before the radio. I was delivering newspaper. I had 2 other jobs. I called him again, and we had already had an interaction when I worked in Azteca America at one of the events because again, Hispanics are big. And when I saw him at that event, he said to me, "Oh, if I knew you did this, I would have hired you before." So we need to communicate. We need to relate. And then when I called, after the server, so he's like, "Yes, you can board," and that's when I had that market and exposure to the other.
I love that. I'm curious about the similar kind of challenges from our other panelists. What other kind of challenges have you experienced and you've been able to bring your cultural knowledge to those kinds of big problems that we often see in PR?
At the top of this conversation, I said that I was fired from my first job. But a lot of that is also I didn't give the background. So when I was hired, it was a organization, small PR, actually multi-marketing organization here that no longer exists. But I actually was promoted. So I started off as a consultant, then got hired as an associate, then went on to had an account, which was a Medicare Advantage account. Before that, before I got the account executive portion of things, I actually was able to pitch in Spanish. Miami, because one of our clients at the time was American Express Open, specifically the Hispanic market section of things. So I remember pitching in Spanish Spanish is my second language. My mom is from Monterrey, Mexico. Of course, I am lucky enough to have been able to learn Spanish from her, but practice makes perfect. And I admittedly do not practice as much as I should professionally. So I remember being extremely scared picking up the phone and pitching these journalists in Miami, which, of course, in Miami, it's very multicultural, not Mexican Spanish. It's definitely more Caribbean Spanish and very much a faster pace. But I remember at the end of the day, I ended up successfully pitching to a few media outlets. And I remember just hearing from the journalists themselves and saying, thank you for at least trying to pitch in Spanish to us. So I think definitely using your second language, even if you're not fully comfortable in it, is actually a superpower for you. So don't be afraid to use it if you know Spanish or another language, because it can definitely help you in your career whenever you are reaching out to other cultures.
I'll jump in and then I'll kick it to Marisol. I want to flip the table a little bit because the other part of imposter syndrome I see in our communities is, well, I don't speak Spanish. So not being enough is very common for people. And of course, I think if you come from an adverse background, you might feel that more than maybe someone else. I certainly have struggled with that, something I actively, consciously fight against, right? My not enoughness in some point had been not Latina enough, not I don't speak Spanish. I probably speak like, so if Jeanette says that's her second language, I'm like, that's my like half language. I know phrases, I know some bad words like a lot of us do, but I grew up in a household where my parents were first generation or second. It depends on how you want to count it. Point being is that they spoke Spanish as a secret language. So if they didn't want the kids to know what they were talking about, they'd switch and you'd hear Spanish going. And I'd be like, so I know a couple words. I know which words to look out for as a kid, for sure. And when I tell that story, I hear people say like, well, yeah, me too. I understand that. And I'm finding if I went and got my PhD, what I would research is like the silenced kind of generation, because I'm right on that X, Y line. And I think a lot of the boomer generation were kind of repressed and shamed out of speaking Spanish. And I swear it was when J-Lo did the Selena movie, because Selena had already been around, and we know that here in South Texas. And her story was she didn't speak Spanish. She would learn the Spanish songs and repeat them. Guess what? That's how I learned mariachi songs. That's how we transfer those skills into PR too. When we're having to do tech PR and financial PR and nonprofit PR, you're like, well, let me just learn what I need to real quick. But all that to say is I want to share that too, Ryan, is because culturally it's like Paola was saying, on this side of the country, they like to do work this way. They like to live this way and operate this way. Guess what? In Texas, like we were mentioning, Austin's kind of a different world than San Antonio, which is different than McAllen, which is different than Abilene. Gosh, even in Texas, it feels like different, countries in its own way. So that's what culture is. And so I also want to demystify it a little bit is like, there are a lot of skills that we use every day that we don't realize are cultural strategies. And I want people to feel like, hey, look, do your best and that's enough. No one is everything to everyone. And then no group is all the same either. And so I want to kind of throw that in the mix of our conversation. Marisol, back to Ryan's question about like that cultural attribute and fusion.
Yeah, exactly the same thing, but the opposite, right? Because I have so many friends that they're amazing in what they do and they always double thought about their position. And I say, no, if you don't see it, they don't know you. So always put your hands on, even if you're up, even if you're hesitating about your accent, that's from the Mexican perspective. So I say, keep doing it, even if you're not secure or you don't feel self-confident about your English or your accent mostly, and you should keep doing it. I always think, and this is from the other perspective, right? From international perspective, is like, I always tell my friends, you're binational, you are bicultural, and you understand both language, bilingual, and that is a skill that not many people have. It's just going from one culture to the other one. That crossover I think, is a powerful skill. Like you don't find it anywhere. So I think as a Latina, we should be so proud of have these amazing skills and we don't embrace it enough. So I always say to my friend, hey guys, let me remember, you're binational, you're bilingual, and you're bicultural. So that's right there is a superpower. I'm really into like continuing education and surround yourself with people like see your potential because that people opens door for you. Mentors. Sometimes as a Latina, we don't want to be seen like, I don't want to take the time from this person. So I don't want to ask for the time and the mentorship. but that mentor can open so many ideas in your mind, so many ways, and how you can focus in your career. And also with people and see your potential, like Jill is now a friend of mine. She opened this opportunity of the book. And literally it was a catharsis for me. When I was writing the book, I was like crying, right? And I was in a cafeteria and I was crying. And I was like, I never actually, until you write the book, I see I went through this journey to get where I am. And I didn't even know that it was so kind of painful somehow because I was in survivor mode and I was more focused on what is next. So I wasn't like really enjoying the journey because what is next? What is next? I want to be better. I want to be better. So, but just embrace your journey, be proud of that journey. I think is something important for as a woman because we have so many roles, right? Whereas in my case, I'm a single mom, the house supporter, I'm a daughter, I'm a woman, I'm a professional, so many hats. And the other one is just be part of your community. Make your community better. It's opened so many doors. Yeah.
What is your parting wisdom for our students who are coming to this with that rich cultural heritage as y'all do?
Enjoy your journey, embrace your journey, be active participant, whether it's volunteering. For me, volunteering has big. Do not stop. Volunteering is big, and volunteering counts as an experience. You learn a lot. Why might not be paid? The pay and the retribution is your experience, your network. I was able to lead the board for the Colombian Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So I wasn't, like actively, but I kept going. And at the same time, I was looking at starting my master's. There will be hurdles on the way. I'm going to be honest with you. California has some issues with education because there's so many. And what I learned is when I wanted to go into public affairs master's degree, it was playing, and this was the topic of conversation in the radio stations, and the big network and PR and things like that. There were no open seats for Hispanic or for immigrants. This is candid because the priority was people, from within the community. To me, that was a little painful. That was the most hurtful because I had already embraced the culture and I thought myself, as annoyed because of my background, Hispanic, I was not allowed to have a seat in school. Things change, or that might not be the moment, but the moment will come later when I was already married, raising a family, and I took a gap for maternity because I wanted to stay first five with my kids. I kept volunteer. That's when I joined the Public Relations Society of America because I thought, okay, I'm at home, like I can still be productive. I have so much more that I want to do besides being with my kids. I continue to go in the journey of education and lifelong learning. So I joined the Public Relations Society of America, which is great because there were a lot of mentors, more women with that experience. I was surrounded by wonderful women that are anchors for public relations. And through these conversations, network of moms, things like that, one of my friends shared, I had already become a citizen. And she said, if you go to, I went to my master's at the GW, George Washington University in DC. It's like, George Washington University opened this path where you don't need your TOEFL test because I was super bad at testing. I don't know. Some students might find themselves in there too. So she was like, you can go and you can, and that's what I did. I searched for that program, and yes, they didn't require a TOEFL or a GRE, and I was able to enroll in the Strategic Public Relations Master degree with a very good university. I was at home, did I did the school online while I was with my kids. So being disciplined, being organized with your times, carve it out. Know if it's your passion and you want to get there, you have to put in the hard. I had to put in hard hours. I was already also working as a Spanish interpreter because I needed a new side occupation that wasn't digital because it's different scheduling. So leverage on your opportunities. I like to meditate and listen to a lot of self-improvement and growing, like audios. And one of the things I've learned through that is know your virtues. We have innate skills for me those languages. And I'm like, yes, I can take up this interpreting, like opportunity. It's going to help me with my language skills. It's going to help me to go out and manage my time and continue to grow my education in public relations, go to the networks. And so then that's where I started getting more opportunities to do events, to practice script writing. That's another big component, just write. Once I knew, I was capable with, to manage these, I got an internship with Department of Defense Media Agency, DMA. And it's a lot. It's a lot that you take because I had my, babies, they're like toddlers who were already starting in the daycare. So learning all of these new aspects of as a woman, maternity and a mom, your time is not your time anymore. And for the moms, it requires us to put the babies in bed and maybe sometimes to stay up to like 3 a.m. I remember to do this project, to have our other financial, no, not just financial, but responsibilities with our husbands, with, our family. They are our support. And they were supportive of me, but I knew I had to also, it's my babies. I couldn't just leave that behind. So carve our time, organize. And then that experience with defense media activity, I met mentors from PRSA. I reached out. I remember I learned something at my master's degree program, which was practical interviews. So I reached out to a PRSA woman that was in the organization, which became my mentor, and she is wonderful. To this day, we do projects together, nurture those relations. And then she shared with me the accreditation in public relations, which was kind of like the next step to build on my skills. Today, thankfully, I can say I work as a government officer, and I've been able to build upon all the skills from my journey, from the moment I left Colombia, from the moment I finished my degree and had my first internship in Colombia, all the way to today. And I'm very happy when I continue to learn how to communicate differently with people. So I hope all of these could be helpful for students, whether you're young, whether you are older, don't worry because the age is not a limit and you'll get there, find your right supports, reach out to me, reach out to us. We actually happy to.
That was fantastic, Paola. I will say, concisely that, especially for UTSA, the University of Texas San Antonio students, but any other student or aspiring pro, get involved in associations as early and often as you can. So we've mentioned the Public Relations Society of America that's open to all practicing pros, of course. There are different levels that you can really contribute to and different continuing education programs and certificates. Like there's a Principles of PR beginner certificate now that I'm learning about. I wish they had when I was early in my career. But of course, the accreditation for public relations. And, when you're ready, 20 years later, you can go after the ambitious. And, I tried and become a fellow, which is kind of the black belt of PR. But it unlocks a whole other level of pro and information and education for you. But also just the people, as we mentioned. If you're a student at UTSA in particular, you've got a Public Relations Society of America student chapter. And that is a blessing and that is a privilege. In San Antonio, I went to a different university, did not have a student chapter. There's so many advantages you have in terms of meeting practicing pros, finding out about internships, shadowing, volunteering, kind of experiencing the work before you try it. Because as we said, PR is stressful. And so you need to know, can I handle this part, or does this part of the industry really attract me more? Or can I deal with crisis comms, or I better not? I'm really more in love with the event planning side of it. And I'll think about crisis in that terms. Having that experience will teach you a whole lot. So start building that network, because the associations become the sororities, fraternities, the friend network you need to make to get through this career. Jeanette, your thoughts?
Yes, of course. I'm going to play off of you, Melissa, because that was one part of wisdom that I definitely want to impart. Network, network, network. And it's also not being afraid to reach out. In San Antonio, one of the first professional organizations, like in college, I was in PRSA and other organizations as well. But one of the first professional organizations that I became a part of was the San Antonio Association of Hispanic Journalists, which you don't have to be a journalist to be a part of. There are actually a lot of communications professionals that are a part of it. Melissa is actually a part of that, as I am as well. And that in the local network helps you actually get to learn and actually become friends, or as friendly as you can, with journalists that are in our market. And everyone's very receptive. It is a lot of Latinos, a lot of us our people, our gente. And in that, they also need, journalists need our skills to also help them with things like their annual gala. And that was actually one of the first volunteer opportunities that I took advantage of when I was up early on professional. I helped gather stuff for the swag bag. So definitely look at other avenues and other organizations around town to really delve and get your feet wet. In college, I know also to talk to your professors, talk to your counselors. I know sometimes it can be a little scary because you see them as big authority figures, but at the end of the day, they're there to help you and also connect you. I had 2 internships at the end of my senior year. One was with the Department of Family and Protective Services, and one of them was with the Better Business Bureau. And a lot of those were connections that were made because I did get to talk with my professors and with my counselors. So network, 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 and do not be afraid to reach out to your fellow connections within your school.
My advice will be first, to be proud of who you are and where you're coming from, be passionate about it, and capital network. Join the PRSA. I never be able to say this, accreditation, but most important, being seen. If you're not seen, you are not known. And if you're not known, you're not going to be recruited. So just say, I'm here and I can do that job. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Marisol, Jeanette, Paola, Melissa. Thank you so much for taking your time to help our PR students be better public relations professionals. And Melissa, can you give us a final word on the book and how maybe we can connect with more of these amazing professionals?
Absolutely. You can learn more about the book at latinasinpr.com. We're excited to share stories with you and just encourage you to see yourself in someone else's shoes so that you can run faster.
On behalf of our young pros, again, thank you so much.